Hey everybody, it is Derek, aka Mr. Shred with Masters of Shred, and I want to thank you for tuning in to this brand new series. I'm talking about a series that I have been wanting to kick off now for years. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pages in Time. Now, what are we going to do in this series? Pretty simple. I'm going to go through my vault of vintage 1980s and 90s guitar magazines, whether it's Guitar for the Practicing Musician, Guitar Player Magazine, Guitar World, or even Guitar School. And we're going to go look at the ads. We're going to revisit and dive into these classic literary masterpieces, honestly, compared to some of the publications we're seeing today in the guitar world of things. But we're going to go back, we're going to look at the ads, we're going to look at the players of the time, we're going to see where they've gone, what they've done, what was hot, what now is not. It's going to be a complete time capsule. We are going to shred back in time, and I invite you to join us. All right, so let's just dive right in. The first issue that we are going to review in Pages in Time is none other than a recent issue that Guitar World put out, which is the May 2024 issue with the mighty Edward Van Halen on it. But, you know what? I could review this, but that image looks a little familiar to me, that image of Eddie. And if memory serves me correctly, I think I actually have the original Guitar World magazine that actually stemmed from. That's right, the original January 1984 issue of Guitar World magazine that had that exact photo shoot. So I figure since we have both right here, right now, why don't we go back to the original, the 1984 issue that turned 40 years old today, and that's exactly what we're gonna do. And right off the bat, what I can tell you is, damn, prices have changed. $9.99 for this Guitar World magazine today, and $2 back in 1984. Inflation's a hell of a thing, ain't it? So sit back, relax, and join me as we shred into the past. So, right out of the gate, we see an ad for the 𝙂𝘋𝙂𝙀𝙎. Not a hugely successful 𝙂𝘋 guitar, definitely different from their lineup at the time. Made for only 4 years, about 700 of these guitars were actually produced, and you could see the guitar player from the band Quarterflash rocking one of these back in the day. And then we see an ad for Tusk Amplification, and their claim to fame was a programmable front end. There were no effects or anything digital in the audio path for that matter, but they could store and recall some gain and EQ settings for the Channel 2, which was a kind of a unique feature at that time. We see an ad over here for Radiant amps, which are basically a budget-friendly amplifier for the time. You don't see much about them today. You usually see them used to like guitar centers or stuff like that. They don't go for much. Classic Test Drive Marshall combo amp ad. Hey, here we go, Guitars on Film. Rob Reiner and the Ventures make movies, and they're talking about Spinal Tap hitting theaters that summer of that year, 1984, and such a great movie too. A little Seymour Duncan advertisement in there, which are always classic. Now this is really good. Crank It Up Heavy Metal on the March, part 1 of a 2-part series. So in this article, Guitar World's addressing their readers' requests for more coverage on some of their favorite metal players. And this is what they're going to go into over the course of the next couple pages here. Now they're trying to get through the roots of heavy metal, looking back at Jimmy Page, Ritchie Blackmore, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, going a little bit about Brian Robertson. And I believe here we are talking about Randy Jackson of the band Zebra, and a little update on how his gear was actually stolen from their van, the equipment truck. It was actually hot-wired. All the gear was stolen, and they lost about $200,000 worth of gear that was not on the insurance list. But no issues, because Dee Snider and the boys of Twisted Sister came to the rescue, and they threw a benefit concert which got them an extra $17,000 raised. Now, will that cover the gear they lost? Absolutely not, but it's a good start when you are a band on the run, right? Now, this is a funny article to me. So Rick Emmett of Triumph mentions how it's sad that Guitar World finally decides to do an article on Triumph and its heavy metal issue because he claims they are one of the least heavy metal bands out there. He actually refers to the US Festival, the US Festival, and he stated that Triumph was the least heavy metal band there, and Van Halen is a power pop band. He said Pretty Woman is not heavy metal. Definitely some bitterness was in the air, it seems, in this article. But very interesting to read. We got a little 𝙂𝘖𝙀𝙄 from the Scorpions, classic article, interviewing him as well. Here we go. Carlos Cavazzio, heavy metal with a classical hook. Big fan of Carlos's work with Quiet Riot, always have been. In this article, Carlos mentions the comparisons that people draw between him and the original guitar player of Quiet Riot, who was, as we know, Randy Rhoads. And he said the only things we have in common is our playing is classically influenced and our riffs contain a lot of diminished licks and odd scales, which I can definitely hear and see. Very cool. Now, this is a great article. Eddie Van Halen drops the bomb on heavy metal. And he had just come back from doing the US Festival with Van Halen and definitely was not happy by the sound of this article. He said the whole US Festival to him was a pain in the ass, and the only thing it received in print was how much they made, which was a staggering for that time $1.5 million for that performance. But he said just as much work went into preparing for that performance, stage-wise, lighting-wise, crew-wise, as doing a whole tour. And he said when you counteract with the fact that they didn't really make that much, they didn't make anything from the video that was shot or the album, which would go on and be sold, did they get a good deal? And they also said, remember, they offered us the money. And because it was kind of a hot topic at the time, how could they do this for that much money? It doesn't seem right. And let's not forget about that Dream Team panel below with the mighty Brad Gillis, Dave Meniketti, Jeff Watson, Vivian Campbell, and Pat Thrall. And here's a great quote by Eddie. He said, Eddie is amused by his adulation as a metal guitar hero. He said, I don't consider myself a heavy metal guitar hero at all. I don't even know what it means. Maybe the more leather and studs you wear, the more metal you are. So I wear funny striped clothes. And there were a lot of great pictures out there with him with just that, striped clothes. Here's some great shots of Eddie with his awesome guitars, and a great quote by Vivian Campbell, which is, I don't think I'd be into playing with other guitars because I'm too much of an egomaniac. Which is funny, because just a short time later, he would go on to play in Whitesnake alongside the mighty Adrian Vandenberg, and then in Def Leppard with the mighty Phil Collen. Don't know if I ever saw those cards in his future, but it's funny to see him say that. Then we got the Gibson and Corvus models. To me, not the most visually appealing models at all, but they did get you into the Gibson market at a rate of only $299. But today, that same guitar will run you north of about $2,000. But again, that's what people are asking. Probably not what they're getting, but definitely a more obscure Gibson. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comment section below. Maybe you have one. They're good guitars. You tell me. This is a great one, too. This is a story about the mighty J.K. Lee. And this is funny because J.K. Lee, even back then in 1983, he says that 80% of the riffs and song ideas on Ozzy's new album are mine, which he's talking about Bark at the Moon. And if you guys know J.K. Lee, you know he has not stopped with that argument. I mean, he's been talking about this argument literally for decades. And this article here just shows proof on how Jake's story never changed. And in 1983, it was acknowledged that he wrote the majority, if not all, of the songs you see on Bark at the Moon. And to this day, he still just wants writing credit. So much so that the rumor is, it's not really a rumor, it's a fact, he said Sharon called him in 2010 with the idea of bringing him on to Ozzy's Scream record, because they were having issues with Zakk Wylde at the time. And as we all know, Gus G went on to take that position in that band. And all Jake wanted was just credit for Bark at the Moon album. He said, no payment. You don't have to pay me. You don't have to pay me down the road. Just give me the credit as an artist. And she said, okay, I'll give you a call back tomorrow. And he never heard from Sharon. So when I see this article, he has been saying this since the 80s. So I've heard a lot of people's stories change. Jake's has never changed. It's the same. So makes you wonder, right? Very interesting. There's a cool little vintage Schecter ad, which we saw a lot of Schecter ads in the guitar magazines back in the 80s as well. A little bit of PV, Awesome centerfold, giving some love to Randy Rhoads with the white prototype from 1980 and the black custom from 1981, worked on and built by the mighty Grover Jackson, who was the Charvel president at the time. Iconic guitars, and I always loved how they had the toggle switch, especially on the white one. You'll see up on that top portion of the wing, which you never see on the RR3s, and I wish they had that, and I wish the RR5s had that, but hopefully we can get that on a budget level Jackson without having to go get the custom shop one. Classic Fender ads, and of course Starlicks. Gotta love those Starlicks VHS tapes. Let me know which ones you had in the comment section below.
How do you pay tribute to one of the greatest guitarists from one of the greatest rock bands of all time? In collaboration with the mighty Sam Hill Customs, Masters of Shred proudly brings to you the limited edition Super Halen 1x12 stack. Each cabinet is scientifically crafted with the highest grade materials to give you that monstrous tone that will light up the sky. Hand-signed and dated by Sam Hill himself, these limited edition amps are limited to just 50 pieces. With no two finishes being the same, you can be assured that your Super Halen amp is one of a kind. Visit www.mastersofshred.com now to reserve yours today before you can't get this stuff no more.
Now this player I'm not really that familiar with, so I couldn't give you too much info, but I did play for David Bowie, and I love the Celestian speaker ad there too. And then we get into some Yamaha stuff too. Yamaha had some great ads in this issue. They did a serious campaign for a couple of pages. Like, look at that, less money, classic. And then you got a bend to 8. Very well thought out. This just proves my point. The ads back then were so well thought out. We need this kind of enthusiasm for guitar again. A little bit of guild action with a 12 string. Sorry, it's a 6 string, I stand corrected. But look, it's got 24 frets. That's awesome. Love that. Now we have a little amp discussion panel here. Some of the greatest players of that time going over their best tones they like for their amps, their settings, and preferences, and things like that. Go a little bit into the Mesa Boogies of the time. The Mark IIB, that I've heard great stories about. Some Marshall's Fenders. This is something really great. The Quiet Riot in Washburn ad with the mighty Rudy Sarzo and Carlos Cavazo. This is interesting because I've always loved the Washburn A20V series that Carlos played back with Quiet Riot in those days. I've always wanted one. Fortunately enough for me, I was actually able to score one just recently. I think it was last month out here locally. And it is actually an A15, I believe, or sorry, an A5V. So it's not a neck through, but it did come from a very special place, from a very special Grammy Award-winning artist that I choose not to mention right now. But he did put a Wonder Bar on it. The neck is incredible. It's a 3-piece maple neck with like a V profile. Feels amazing, and this thing sounds amazing. I got a killer deal on it too, and finally happy to have this guitar in the arsenal. Then we also have this Cort ad here, and Cort are still around today. And, you know, back in the day, they were making guitars that resembled your popular Gibsons, your popular Fender Strats. And look at it, though, $349.95. That's more than the Gibson Corvus and Invader were going for just a couple pages back, and that was a Gibson. So maybe Cort was known for high-quality guitars back in the day, but, you know, I'm not knocking on them. They make great guitars today. I've seen a lot of them, and they're building guitars for a lot of other well-known companies as well out of their plants. But funny you see that a Cort back then was going for more than a Gibson was new. Wild stuff. And you also have your Schecter acoustic guitar strings of that time, which are pretty interesting. And now we go into a little bit about some acoustic pickups of that time that were popular and some write-ups on those. Always informative back in the day. Then we go here, a little bit of a lesson. And let's not forget about this, Garden State Music Center. I mean, I've heard great stories from tons of guitar players who grew up in that New Jersey area talking about Garden State Music and some of the incredible guitars they have. But look at that ad. The only buy one, get one free music store in the world. Buy any guitar, any make, any model in our huge inventory and get the second one free. And they mention brands such as Washburn, Epiphone, Gibson, Les Paul. But if you go real down In that ad, you're going to see in fine print, free instruments and accessories are of equal value to the one you purchased and may be mixed or matched with any of the above brands mentioned in our inventory. Excluded from the offer are BC Rich Charvel, Special Edition guitars, Gibson Lucille, and ES335 models, and saxophones. Something tells me you couldn't just walk in there and get a Gibson Les Paul, buy one, get one free. Maybe you could. Maybe you guys can clarify for that. Can anybody verify who's in the New Jersey area if you could actually get a free Gibson Les Paul when you bought a Gibson Les Paul? We had some cool Washburn effect pedals from back in this year, 1984. And those actually hold some good value today. They're not like $20, $30 pedals. They're still going for like $100, $125 when you see them. Never played them though. Can't tell you if they're good or not. So you guys have to let me know in the comment section below if you got some of those on your rig still. And we, of course, have the 𝙃𝘼𝙂 Trems. I really dig the Les Trem, too, because, you know, I've always thought it's cool when you can see a Les Paul Trem, that's a tremolo bar style, that you don't have to mount for. It just goes directly on the holes you already have, clean, easy swap, and you can still find these on Reverb in, like, all brass. I would, unfortunately, need them in all black, and I don't think they were making all black ones, but very cool to see that Trems like this existed. I mean, such an innovative time back in the 1980s with the guitars. You know, every company was really just going for it. And it's really refreshing, even though we're going back 40 years to experience that. I think we would hope to one day experience that now as far as the hardware goes. Let me know your thoughts on that. Little cool advertisement for the Robin Octave guitar. Big fan of Robin guitars out of Houston, Texas. Always have been some of the best high quality shred guitars you could ever get your hands on. And from what I have heard, they are getting ready for a super big comeback. But very awesome to see that kind of guitar out there at the time, which was based off of what Les Paul was doing 30 or so years prior. They actually made a guitar for it. So very cool there. Some more Robin ads when their guitars were being made inside Japan before they went on to ESP a couple of years later. But awesome guitars. And, of course, when they ended up in Houston, making them out of the USA, which was just mind-blowing. And then a little more from Arbor. And I've heard of Arbor guitars before. They make some pretty wild ones. But look at the headstock on that V. I mean, it looks like a dang lobster claw. That might actually be one of the ugliest damn headstocks I've ever seen. Not a fan of that, but I see where they're going with it. At least they got that nice setup for the Randy Rhoads style V, where you have the 4 knobs right down there like Randy's, where it wasn't the 3 knobs that they were putting on the Jackson RR3s. I'm going to take a trip over to the marketplace. Always cool seeing these ads from up-and-coming businesses trying to make a name for themselves during this period. You got Rainbow Music specializing in buying and selling Gibsons. Kramer's got to see if they're still around. It's cool stuff. Going a little bit of Korg, and then we ended on this Ovation. And bam, folks, there it is. The January 1984 issue of Guitar World magazine 40 years ago. And there is the new one that came out just recently, 40 years later. A lot more colorful, it seems. And, you know, a lot more ads in general. But do the ads compete properly with what they were doing back in the 80s? I don't know. I want to hear your guys' view on that. I'm not totally sold. I think there's just more enthusiasm. And there it is, folks. Our first episode of Pages in Time. And if you don't do so already, make sure that you subscribe to our channel, show us you care, shred that notification bell so we can continue to give you your daily dose of shredtacular content here on the platform. And we do appreciate all of our followers already who have subscribed to the channel. It means the world to us so we can keep this machine moving.